So, how will history view this moment in American political life? And how can the past help us understand what is happening today? I am honored to have two Pulitzer Prize-winning historians with me today. Doris Kearns Goodwin won the award for her book about Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt called No Ordinary Time. Her most recent book, another terrific read, is Leadership in Turbulent Times. And Jon Meacham, my old colleague from Newsweek, was honored with the Pulitzer for his Andrew Jackson book, American Lion. Jon's latest is titled His Truth is Marching On, John Lewis and the Power of Hope. Meacham is an occasional advisor to President Biden. So, Jon, step back. I know it's a difficult, it's in some ways an unfair question, but how would you characterize this moment? We do seem divided. What's your best summary?
Well, I hate to say it because of the way the decade turned out, but I think we're in the 1850s in America. I think you have a dedicated minority of the population. It was the secessionist slaveholding interest in the 1850s. Today, it is this vast swath of people who have found a home in the Republican Party, who are no longer part of a coherent and constructive and good-intentioned conversation about the future of the country. And when you turn politics functionally into religion, and I believe that's what's happened, is you have your own holy books, you have your own prophets, you have your own path to salvation. That is a terrible, terrible blow to free government, because a democracy fundamentally depends on our capacity to see each other not as adversaries or heathen, but as neighbors. And so I really do believe that the divisions we're enduring now are a difference of kind and not degree of certainly those that have affected us since the 1930s.
And Doris, when you look at a period when there's no question we're deeply divided, and you look at the 1850s, what gets the country out of it? What changes the phase? Does it take, a terrible conflagration like the Civil War? Does it take great leadership, that Lincoln displayed? Well, what's your sense?
I think what it takes, and I think this is the positive way to look at it, is a combination of people from the outside pressuring in and the leadership that's there. At the end of the Civil War, when Lincoln was called a liberator because of the Emancipation Proclamation, he said, "Don't call me a liberator. It was the anti-slavery movement and the Union soldiers that did it all." So the positive thing that happened during those terrible 1850s, and Jon is so right, it's when the country was separating. Lincoln actually warned when the Civil War started that the problem was that democracy itself would seem an absurdity if the people who lost an election, in that case the South, the Democrats lost the election, think they can just break up the Union because they lost. And that's somewhere where we are today. But on the other hand, that anti-slavery movement grew, the Republican Party was formed, and Lincoln became the president of the United States. The Civil War was fought. Yes, so many thousands of people had to die, but in the end, emancipation was secured and the Union was restored. He was so worried if that Union wasn't restored, as I say, that democracy itself would prove meaningless. You do have a similar threat that Jon may have thought about too, from Teddy Roosevelt, who warned that democracy would be under threat, and I think in some ways there's an echo today, if people in different sections and regions begin to think of each other as the other rather than as common American citizens. But the answer for that is what you were saying in your opening piece. It's civics education. I believe it's national service. You get people from the city to the country, country to the city. You begin to create a new generation that has shared values, and you bring back an understanding of what was wrong about America and what was right about America. It's the activism of the citizens. We had more people voting than ever before. We got to get people out to the polls. That's the key.
Jon, how much of this is, are we grappling with the fact that Abraham Lincoln died and his vision for Reconstruction was never really pursued, and Reconstruction then failed, and Jim Crow was reimposed? In a sense, does it all go back, or a large part of it go back to that fact that while there was the Emancipation Proclamation, while there was the freeing of slaves and the 13th and 14th and 15th Amendments, it didn't mean a lot for 100 years afterwards.
The Civil War changed laws, but it didn't change enough hearts. I don't think there's any doubt about that. It didn't change enough minds. One of the tragedies of American history, if not the central tragedy of American history, is that we are founded on an idea of equality, but we profess it far more often and with greater passion than we practice it. The struggle for justice and equality, and a history of which we can be proud, is a daily one, I would argue, at the risk of self-parody, in everybody's soul. You know, the soul of a person, I believe, is not all good or all bad, but is an arena of contention in which our worst instincts do battle against our better angels. And I don't want to drag you two into this, but I know that my worst instincts win a hell of a lot more often than my better angels do. And because a democracy is the sum of its parts, and the parts are human, not clinical, this is a country not founded on parchment, it's founded on people. And so if we the people, cannot realize that a sense of neighborliness and a sense of the pursuit of justice for all are not animating principles, then we fall into this Hobbesian world where it's the war of all against all. And I fear far more than I would have even a year ago, because of the aftermath of the election, because of January 6th, I fear for the first time in my adult life that we may be handing over a democracy to our children that does not resemble the best parts of the democracy that shaped us.
Doris, John was talking about how leaders can lead us, you know, toward the better angels of ourselves or our darker impulses. The question I have, which is sort of relates to that, if leadership is so important, clearly Donald Trump is viewed by some very large part of the country as his leader, so much so that he dominates a party in a way that I can't recall any prior president in American history. The one that I think of is Teddy Roosevelt, who so dominated the Republican Party that he left it and tried to, in effect, create his own party, the Bull Moose Party. Are there any other parallels? What does it mean when a leader gets so powerful that he is more powerful than the party itself?
I think partly it has to do with the nature of the media today, right? I mean, you had one of the scary things about the 1850s is that you had a partisan media, so that when Lincoln goes to a debate with Stephen Douglas, the Republican newspaper would say, he did great, he was carried out on the arms and shoulders of his supporters. And when he is carried on in the Democratic newspaper, will say he was so terrible he fell on the floor that they had to drag him out. That's what we have today. We have an echo chamber. We have that consideration of the other being given to us every day by people watching different cable networks, listening to different social media. And you've got President Trump, former President Trump, that dominates one of that form of media. So it is a scary thing, but I think we have to remember, what are the mysteries of when citizens become active? You've got the civil rights movement that's there before Lyndon Johnson is able to get 3 great civil rights laws through. You've got the women's movement, the gay movement, the environmental movement right now, the climate change movement. We've got to depend that there are mysteries when the times demand it, those movements happen, and then you need the leader in there. And if a leader comes in and can mobilize the sentiment of the people, then change happens. And I still believe that we're at that moment now. It's up to us to write the end of the story. We know how the 1850s ended. We know it ended in the Civil War. We're still writing now the chapter of where this is going to end. There's a chance for what Biden's going to try to do with infrastructure, with jobs, with climate change. There's a chance for the midterm elections. There's a chance in 2024. There are leaders out there and there are activists out there, and we're just going to have to take hold of, as John said, the better angels of our nature. But it's happened before when we needed it to, and I think we've got to trust that we can make it. But it's up to us. We are the government. We're the collective entity right now.
John, when you think about what direction are we going, you know, left or right, you said something interesting in the break to me. You said economically, clearly we've moved left, but culturally we may be, you know, center right or right. I mean, how do you account for that puzzle?
Well, I have a theory about this, which is that one of the reasons for the Republican flight from reason is a fundamental and almost elemental sense that from Eisenhower until Trump, Republicans and conservatives supported presidents who in the end did not deliver for them. And when you come to 2016 and you have this choice of former governors related to presidents and senators, and then you have this voice, the Trump voice, there were enough people who thought, you know what, we're like Lucy in the football, we're not going to fall for this again. And that's because, as you and I have talked about this for years, Eisenhower was not a radical right-wing Republican. He said if anyone were to attack Social Security, that would be political suicide. Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford were centrists. Neither one could even conceivably be nominated today. George W. Bush would tell you that there is a line between TARP during the financial crisis and Trump. And so I think that I believe Republicans at some level know that they've basically lost the argument over the role of the state in the marketplace. Now, I know a lot of folks on the left think that's crazy, but from their point of view, government keeps getting bigger, and that was a central claim. So therefore, their anxiety, their political energy has to find a channel, and that channel has become cultural. The Republican Party, as currently constituted right now, is far more about having power so that liberals can't have it than having power for a positive agenda.
It is what the historian Fritz Stern called, referring to Germany in the 1920s, the politics of cultural despair. Do you think, I mean, Doris, you have a wonderful, buoyant optimism about America. Do you worry that there is this, this very dark strain of people who feel their country is going away, that, this is the last stand? There is a kind of, dark millenarianism to this idea that, like, if we don't stop this now, the country is going down to perdition.
I do think it's a problem, and I have no question about everything that John has said. I guess what gives me that buoyant optimism that I'm just not willing to get rid of is the idea that democracy has been on trial before in this country several different times, and we somehow came through with greater strength. When FDR was about to assume office in 1933, it was said to him, if your New Deal works, you'll be the greatest president in history. If it fails, you'll be the worst president in history. He said, no, I'll be the last president in history. Democracy itself is on trial. It was on trial then. It was on trial during the Civil War. It was on trial in the early days of World War II. I think we have to remember these tough times. We're in a really tough time. And as I said before, voting is the key right now. The idea that people are trying to restrict the vote, the very thing on which a democracy depends. I mean, LBJ said, without voting is the basic right of which all the rest are meaningless because it controls your destiny. So I think the real fight for the Biden administration right now, the most important thing that's going to happen in Congress, are they going to be able to protect voting rights against these state attempts, not only to take away the right for people to have access to votes, but to potentially deal with the counting of votes. I mean, and to have partisan involvement in that. This has to be fought. It has to be fought with every bone in every people's body. It should be a bipartisan majority that cares about voting, or democracy itself really is at risk. And I think that's the central point we're at right now.
What a fantastic conversation with the two of you. Thank you so much. It's an honor to have both of you on.